said Zane.
This episode goes out to our patron, John Marin. Thank you so much for helping produce the show. Hi there, Garrett Robinson here. Welcome to the 27th episode of the Nightblade Epic Podcast Season 3. Hey listener, there are only 2 more episodes left in this season of the show and it's getting pretty intense, isn't it? Well, here's a bit of lighter news. There's less than a month left until the release of the next Underrealm book. Tales of the Wanderer Volume 1 is that book, and you can find it at underrealm.net/wander. This is such a gorgeous book, listener. I got the first copies in the mail not long ago, and every once in a while, I just find myself staring at them, smiling. I'm so incredibly proud of this book. Honestly, at the very least, you should go to underrealm.net/wander and check out the cover. It's the best cover art we've ever had. And if you like the art enough, maybe you should pre-order yourself a copy. Pre-orders are incredibly helpful to us as we get ready for the book launch. And if you pre-order a hardcover in the United States, it will even come to you signed. Get your copy today at underrealm.net/wander. That's underrealm.net/wander. Okay, now it's time for today's episode. Today, you're getting chapter 36 of Darkfire. When we left off, Lauren and her friends had returned to the Shade Stronghold to rescue Jordell and Jem from the enemy's clutches. Enjoy! Darkfire, Chapter 36. They found the stronghold drawn up and ready to defend itself against them. The party halted just out of bowshot. The bridge before them was empty, as was the rock shelf all around, but the walls were well occupied, with many shades in blue and gray standing with spears and bows in hand. Albern looked to Zane. "I imagine you have some way to get us in?" "That gate cannot stop me, nor will the soldiers on the walls. We need not fear their spears and arrows." "And what of Tristan?" said Albern. "You saw him when we fought in the caves. Some dark magic protects him. He cannot be slain by blade or bolt." Zane's smirk widened, becoming a smile that was almost cruel. "I have neither blade nor bolt at my disposal, but let him test himself against my flames, and we shall see if ashes can come back to life." He dismounted and walked for the bridge. Lauren and the others made to follow, but he turned sharply. "Stay," he said. "I would rather not worry about protecting you. Let me clear the path first." Lauren hesitated, but Albern spoke in her place. "As you wish." He nodded to Lauren, and they stilled their horses while Zane walked on. As he reached the bridge, someone on the wall gave a shout. The archers lifted their bows and drew. Arrows sailed through the air towards him. Though she knew his powers well, still Lauren straightened in her saddle, and she almost cried out for him to flee. But Zane reached out, and even from behind him she could see the dark glow emanating from his eyes. The arrows halted in mid-flight, trapped inside a wall of air. As Zane cast his arm forwards, the arrow flew back towards their enemies, showering them with death. The shades ducked behind the battlements, but several were too slow and pitched into the courtyard, screaming as they died. Lauren turned away, refusing to look. But she could not block out the sound, even when she covered her ears. "It is Zane's doing," she told herself. "I could not stop him, even if I tried." Zane came to the far end of the bridge, just a few paces away from the stronghold gate. The archers dared to loose another volley, but he cast it back just as easily. This time they were ready and ducked behind the battlements. They must have thought to keep shooting until they broke his defenses, thinking they were safe behind their gate. They were wrong. Zane sent forth a roaring ball of flame that crashed into the gate with a thunderous explosion. It blew inwards, shattering into 1,000 shards of molten metal. The shrapnel tore at the bodies of the soldiers gathered on the other side. Their screams turned Lauren's stomach. Albern caught her eye. "What now of your promise not to take a life?" "It is not my choice," said Lauren, shaking. "Zane casts the flames. I would not have killed them." The words sounded hollow, even in her own ears. She had given him the Mage Stones, without which Zane would have no such power. Not for this, and not to kill the Yeren guard who had shot at them upon the road. But then, if she had not given him the stones, they would all be dead. That was what she had to remind herself. And after Jordell and Jem were rescued? Then Lauren could only hope he would remember his vow to remain true. Shades ran down from the battlements to assemble in the courtyard, standing before Zane in rank and file. Lauren could barely glimpse them through the gate. Zane sent forth another wall of flame, just as he had against the satyrs in the hollow. This time, though, he showed mercy, and did not send it rushing towards them. The heat of it put terror enough into their hearts, and they turned to flee. She heard a crash as the stronghold's west gate was thrown open. The Shades ran for their lives down the road and into the valley far below. Then Zane let his flames die, and he turned to look at her across the bridge. His eyes were lit with battle wrath, and a fierce smile twisted his lips. But then he saw Lauren's face, and the anger and smile died as one. The flame guttered to sparks, and then to nothing, and his hands fell to his sides. "Come forth now," he called, "but keep a wary eye still. There may be more of them skulking about." Albern put himself at their head, riding forwards with an arrow nocked but undrawn. Lauren and Annis followed close behind, their eyes searching for threats in the deathly silence. There was no sound but the hollow wind whistling through the peaks. Even the rain had finally stopped, though the air still hung thick and wet, threatening to resume the downpour at any moment. One thought nagged at Lauren. They had yet to see Triskin. She knew she would have spotted him upon the castle wall, and she could not picture him fleeing into the valley with the rest of his men. "Beware of Triskin," she said sharply, though part of her wanted to remain silent, as though by speaking his name she would invite him to appear. "Aye," said Albern, "and if we see him, you run. Let Zane and me deal with him." "Easily promised, and still more easily done," said Lauren. The courtyard was quiet and empty but for the mangled bodies of the Shades. Lauren was relieved to see fewer than she had thought, but still she felt sick at the loss of their lives. Whatever promises had led these people to join the Shades, she doubted they had agreed to face a wizard wroth with mage stones. "We know they are not keeping Jordell and Jem in the jail beside the secret entrance," she said. "But there is another in the south wall. Let us search there." No one wanted to be the first to open the door leading inside, but after a moment Zane threw it open and strode in. For him, Mayup the fear was not so great. The hallway was empty, bare even of torches. Zane threw forth a ball of blue mage fire that floated in front of them. Lauren led them to the jail, but the cells were empty. "Where else would he keep them?" said Annis. Lauren could see the worry on the girl's face and knew that nearly all of it was for Jem. "Are there dungeons below the castle, Mayup?" "Not likely," said Albern. "Few masons would burrow into the land beneath a fortress and thus weaken its foundation, especially so high in the great rocks where faults in the stone are common." "They might be in the great hall," said Lauren. Her heart was heavy. She had feared it might be so since they first entered, for some whisper in her mind said they would not find their friends in the jail. The great hall was where they had seen Triskin for the first time. If the foreboding in her heart held any truth, it was where they would find him again. Albern must have sensed her mind, for his face grew as grim as she felt. But he led them back to the courtyard without comment, and together he and Zane approached the wide wooden doors that opened into the hall. "Quiet as we enter," said Albern. "We cannot know what—" Zane gave a snort and sent forth wind, blasting the doors open with a gust. They slammed into the walls and sent a great thundering boom to echo throughout the stronghold. "Or we could cast prudence to the winds," said Albern amiably. He motioned Lauren and Annis back as he sidled up to the edge of the doorway. Lauren ignored him and crept forwards, hand on her dagger, though she knew better than to draw it, except at utmost need. But Zane strode in without hesitation, straight through the center of the hall. As Lauren and Albern followed him more cautiously, they saw their worry had been baseless. Triskin did not lie within, nor did any other shade. But there were Jordell and Jem. They sat in simple wooden chairs, facing away from the door towards the dais. Their hands and feet were bound, and they did not move. Their heads hung limp upon their chests. From behind, Lauren could see the knots of gags. Even at the great din from Zane's entrance, neither of them stirred. She saw blood soaking their clothing. Lauren's heart quailed, and she felt rooted to the floor. Annis had no such restraint. "Jem!" she screamed, running forwards as tears ran down her face. "Jem, no!" She came around his front and seized his face, lifting it up. Tears spilled anew as she shook him, his head flopping limply in her arms. Then he yanked his head back and out of her grasp, shaking it with a muffled groan. "Jem!" cried Lauren. Her limbs answered the command of her mind at last, and she ran to him. Annis hurried to remove his gag, and once free of it, Jem looked up at the two of them. "Why would you do that?" he groused. "I think my head hurts enough without your help, thank you." When Lauren saw his face, she gasped and covered her mouth. He was purple with bruises, and a gash in his forehead stretched from temple to hairline. His arms, too, were covered in welts, and beneath his collar she could see great purple splotches where he had been struck again and again. "Jem!" cried Annis, holding his head in her arms. "Jem, Jem! We thought we lost you." "You did not, though you will if you keep strangling me," croaked the boy. "I would kill half the kingdom for even a drop of water." Annis hastened to fetch some from the horses in the courtyard, while Lauren turned to Jordell. His head lolled like Jem's, but she could see the rise of his chest as he breathed. He looked, if anything, worse than the boy. But as she shook him gently, his eyes snapped open, and he looked up at her with a gaze as sharp as ever. Lauren quickly untied the gag, and then held his gaze as Albern knelt behind him to cut his bonds. "Greetings, mystic," she said lightly. "Your rescue has arrived, though late, for which I hope you can find forgiveness." "Lauren," said Jordell, his voice quiet but still strong. Where is Triskin?" Lauren felt a shiver down her spine, but she shook it off and smiled at him. "Hidden in some hole, no doubt. We have not seen him, though we managed to frighten off his army." Albern finished with the bonds, and Jordell rubbed at his wrists, which were chafed raw. "What? How did you manage it?" But then he turned, and his eyes fell upon Zane. He saw the strength in the wizard's limbs, and the harsh look upon his face. The mystic's face grew grim. Before he could say or do something rash, Lauren laid a restraining hand on his shoulder. "It is all right, Jordell. He saved us, and you as well. Without him, we would already be dead." "You gave him more stones," said Jordell. He looked at her in smoldering anger. "Lauren, did you learn nothing from Wellmont?" "We would already be dead," Lauren said again, more harshly this time. "I had a choice. Trust him or become a feast for satyrs and harpies. You yourself said you believed his remorse. I put my faith in him, and you as well, rather than let us all be killed." "A long enough time it took the two of you," said Zane with a bitter laugh. But fear not, mighty mystic. The sickness has not claimed me yet, nor will I let it again. It seems I am your puppet once more, as I think I was fated to be." Jordell met his eyes and frowned. "That is something I have never asked of you. I want you by my side of your own choice or not at all. If you think I hold you upon some leash, then you are worse off than when the Magestone sickness ate away at your limbs, and would do well to be quit of us as soon as you can." Zane's anger faltered, and he cast his eyes away. I am sorry. I did not mean you insult. The power, it..." He trailed off and shook his head. "No matter. We should leave here." His arm over Alburn's shoulder, Jordell shuffled outside. Jem tried to walk with Annis's help, but his steps came too slow. Lauren scooped him up in her arms like a babe, at which he squawked, but then he settled down in her grasp as though she bore him on a litter. "I would travel all the 9 lands if I could find transport like this," he said. Lauren made as if to drop him, catching him at the last second. Jem whimpered at the pain of his bruises. "My pardon," she said, smiling brightly. "I am not so steady a steed as a good horse, you can clearly see." Jem only glared at her and muttered darkly. They mounted their horses. Jordell took back his charger while Zane fetched another from the corral, which the shades had abandoned. Jem sat behind Annis, clutching her tightly and wincing at every step the plow horse took. To ease their injuries, they walked slowly to the stronghold's east gate, stepping out before the bridge, and to freedom. But just beyond the gate, they reined to a halt. Lauren's blood turned to ice, and she felt the children quail on their horse beside her. Triskin stood on the bridge to block their escape, and an evil smile split his face from ear to ear. This has been a production of Legacy Books, written and narrated by Garrett Robinson. The music in this podcast was created by Will Musser. Check out his incredible work at willmusser.com. That's WILLMUSSER.com. Today's letter is Y. Thank you for listening. Bye-bye. Hey there, listener. Next week's episode is, well, just to warn you, it's gonna be pretty rough. But you'll be okay. I'll still be here, and we're gonna get through it together. All right. See you next week.